Okay. No, don't be sorry. They would have asked me later,
Yeah, you were.
where's your recording? And I would have been like, what? Okay, that's too loud. Okay. Okay. I won't do all of that over again. So hello, everybody. So my name is Matt Byer. I'm the Fiscal Data Coordinator on the School Financial Services team. So primarily my work consists of transitioning all of the financial reporting we collect on that team for the purposes of doing the aid runs, determining revenue limits, doing equalization aid, meeting other state and federal reporting requirements, and mainly transitioning from our legacy system, which was very manual entry, sort of after the fact, reporting and data collection, to working with the school districts to push data via Net5 API to WISEdata Finance, and then pulling that data into WiSFiP, which is our Wisconsin School Finance portal, in order to complete a lot of that required reporting to meet state and federal report requirements and do all the other fun stuff. Prior to that, I was a federal fiscal monitoring consultant on the Title I and special education teams, and worked a lot with another one of our applications at DPI, WISE grants. And I'm still a product owner of that. And as we continue to sort of transition the reports into our new platform, and we continue to make improvements and connect to other systems at DPI that we use for reporting or grant management or things like that. So today I really am just going to give some updates as to where we are in that work and what our current focus is and sort of where we're going to be going in the future. So I'm going to have problems. This might be. So currently, what is WISEdata Finance? It's very analogous to WISEdata or WISEdata Student. It is the system in which the LEAs and other agencies push financial data to us via an API. WISEdata Finance is what I'm describing. They're working with a lot of finance people. It's really just the conduit for the financial data from the LEAs. And that comes in, and then we pull that in instead of having to prior, we would manually collect that information through our reporting systems, either manually entered or some of it would be uploaded. It would be done sort of after the fact or after the reporting period was over. We'd have a bunch of checks in place to make sure that the data that we were receiving met certain criteria, that the data was clean, and do a lot of cleanup there. The sort of historic problem with that is as we would discover issues with that financial reporting, things would need to be fixed on the report, with the expectation that if you're fixing it on the report or recoding something from an accounting standpoint, you're then going back into your systems and also correcting the issue there. And humans being humans, that's where we start to diverge. The transition to WISEdata Finance is really an opportunity to where we can now, in a continual, if not continuous fashion, have data and more detailed data pushed to us into DPI, and we can build a lot of that reporting based off of that data and no longer require manual entry of that data. And the upside is if we do run into issues where there are issues with the data, or if we run into certain fiscal scenarios that either are a problem or indication of something not being coded correctly, or we need additional information, all of that isn't resolved in the report. It is something where, in order to resolve any of those issues, it's fixed on the LEA's ledger, and then the data is pushed to WISEdata Finance again to clear out that issue. A second. So the heart of WISEdata Finance and that data collection is the Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements, and which also known as WISFiP. And that is the state prescribed accounting language that all LEAs and some other agencies have to use to report their financial data to DPI. So on a yearly basis, we sort of revise WISFiP on a yearly basis. The vendors download that chart of accounts into their system. Districts crosswalk or associate their local ledger and their local chart of accounts to the DPI chart of account per the rules of WISFiP. Things roll up to a required reporting level. And that financial data sort of consists of three data elements: local account, which is just the mapping of that local account to the DPI chart of account level; local budget, which is the budget amount; and then local actual, which is an actual amount as the year progresses. So, as I've already started going to, it really is a mindset shift to continually updating financial data and pushing it and actually fixing the issues on the LEA side and pushing that data to us. So it's more proactive, it's more automated. There's less having to get in and manually do things, so it's less prone to error. And it's been a transition. It's been some fun. We're getting some momentum. This year, we collected our annual report of financial data for 22-23 for the first time in WiSFiP based upon WISEdata Finance data. And we're continuing to move more and more of our reporting into the new system to utilize this data. That's not even. Yep. So where we're at for the completing the reporting for the 22-23 fiscal year, we have a small number of districts we're still working with to complete the aid certification process that we need to do the aid runs, and then to complete the annual report. We spent a lot of time during that aid certification annual report process for this past cycle, working with a lot of the LEAs in order to sort of clean up that data that was being pushed, addressing issues with how the accounts were set up on the local ledger with WISFiP to ensure that they were pushing correctly, working on just some technical issues from vendor to vendor that they may have been experiencing, but really doing a lot of work that was pretty sure a lot of that work was sort of a one-time expenditure, no pun intended, of effort in order to sort of get the ledger sort of cleaned up and the data pushed and the technical infrastructure in place to push that data. We did a lot of preliminary work with districts prior to the annual report because we've also connected the system to our WISE grants, our federal grant management system, for the purposes of doing IDA maintenance of effort. So it's been a lot of sort of cleanup from a WISFiP chart of account standpoint, but luckily that's work that doesn't need to be done in an ongoing basis now that we sort of got things set up. We still collected the special education annual report through our legacy system for this last year. We're working on moving that report to WISFiP for next year's reporting. We've already removed a lot of our applications into WISFiP, including the ones where we collect what the tax levies are for school districts, what the debt schedules are for school districts, that school districts, when they take on debt, has to be reported to DPI. And our module for where districts report referenda and referenda results. So those have all been moved to the new platform. Another fun financial report that LEAs need to complete is the SS school level reporting, which is something that we just rolled out a couple months late, but we just rolled it out a couple weeks ago. And we built that report to, similar to the annual report, utilize the financial data that's already being pushed to us. And then by collecting some additional information, being able to just calculate that report instead of having to have things manually entered. And then as we pivot to reporting for the 23-24 fiscal year, We already have a majority of the districts who submitted their budget report for their 23-24 data. Budget data is a separate set from actual data. All the districts are reporting the referenda. We had a smaller set of districts that had referenda in February. So we used that module to collect that referenda information and update the results. We have another larger set of referenda coming up in April. Well, we opened up the annual report for 22-23 in WiSFiP. There's some additional pieces to that annual report that we didn't have the capacity to include for that first year. This is some reporting that was actually included in the previous PI 1505 annual report in SAFR that we're building into the system, where we collect fund balances sort of across all funds and the debt balances that may of where they're at for that current year. We're building additional addenda and validations in WISEdata Finance that we had in place specifically around a couple of areas, including the Common School Fund and OPEB contributions. And then the big thing is we're transitioning the special education annual report, which is the data collection that we do in order to calculate and distribute state special education categorical aid. And I'll get into that some more. And then, which only leaves like another 18 different reports that are still in our legacy system that we're going to transition over, fun things like transfer of service. We're also in a year 2 of a pilot phase in WiSFiP, working with our collections team to transition the PI 1563 membership count from our legacy system into WiSFiP as well, where we are collecting student data and then having additional data collection completed within WiSFiP. But for the first time, we're using that enrollment data as the starting point for doing membership counts within WiSFiP for all sorts of other reporting. But membership is enrollment with a whole bunch of additional categories and sort of determinations that are made for determining what the actual membership is by district that we use for things like revenue limits, all the other financial reporting, equalization. There was a session of that yesterday. It is sort of a dramatic transition. It was better at the federal funding. So really something that right now in our world, in the financial reporting world at TPI, and with other teams, including the WISE grants, the federal grants team, and other areas, we're really emphasizing the fact that the number one thing from the financial data collection standpoint for us is WFR. Getting everybody up to speed, getting everybody's chart of accounts and ledgers set up within what to utilize WFR correctly, trying to increase everybody's sort of core knowledge around WFR is really sort of our number one priority. Definitely over the last couple of years during this transition and doing things like working with maintenance of effort. That's definitely the area where in order to make all of this financial data reporting work, it's based upon using WFR and the different elements within WFR correctly to actually push data. WFR. So WFR is an accounting language that is hierarchical in nature, which means that at the local level, you can have more detailed accounts within each of the data elements, and those can roll up to more general categories for each of the data elements. And then we have a set sort of DPI chart of account level, that's the barest level of detail we need in order to complete some of our reporting. What we're actually finding out then that is though, because the LEAs push not only that DPI chart of account level data, they push their local accounts along with it as well, which the local accounts also contain additional information that we can utilize to automate and streamline a lot of our reporting going forward, such as some of the optional woofer elements, like there's a 3-digit location code within woofer that can be associated with actual school building locations and used for other purposes on the local level. There's also a project code, which is used for tying expenditures to specific programs that actually need to have those expenditures tracked. Some good examples of that are within Fund 27, the project codes 011 and 019, which determine that which indicate whether or not a state and local cost is eligible for state categorically reimbursement for special education. All the federal grants, those expenditures have to be associated with a project code, so we can complete reporting for those different programs. We do revisions to woofer at least once a year, usually in order to address if we find something incorrect in woofer, or if some language needs to be changed, or things need to be made clearer, or if we find ways to streamline the overall woofer chart of accounts, we'll make a revision. Sometimes we have to make a revision because of information that comes from GAAP and GASB, which is the generally accepted accounting principles and the government accounting standards board. So as they say, oh no, this needs to be reported to these governmental agencies in this manner going forward, we want to make sure that woofer is up to being able to do that. And then as we make these revisions, we need to make sure that the end result, the chart of accounts that results in is then communicated to the vendors, and the vendors are then integrating in their systems. So that accounting that is going forward is with the most recent revision. So this is an example of a woofer account with the more detailed local account being used in the left column. You can see with the sort of highlighted elements, those are actually objects on those expenditures accounts. The local account is using a more detailed data element, which rolls up to the DPI chart of account level. But this allows a certain amount of flexibility to allow the LEAs to utilize woofer in this level of detail for a huge number of different things, of tracking things within their systems. And we can also just ensure that it rolls up to a level that is usable by DPI for completing all of this reporting requirements and aid runs and everything else. Similar to WISEdata, the data that is pushed to WISEdata Finance is subject to a couple of levels of validations. We have L1 validations, which just means that the data being pushed is not in a format that is usable by the system. So an L1 validation is just nothing is being put into the system. It's being stopped from actually getting in. And the reason why that may happen is if the accounts that are being pushed to DPI are in a woofer format that doesn't match up to the woofer chart of account. Could be an object and a function that aren't allowed to go together in a certain fund. It could be that the LEA is reporting a less detailed function than what we minimally require for that account. So L1 just means that data is not going to end up in the system. And each of the vendors has, reporting and utilities within their systems to indicate, okay, you push data, here are the accounts that did not make it in. L2 validations are validations within the system once the data has been pushed. And those fall into a couple of categories. Really, one is a data one and fiscal. So there's a data formatting L2 validations that could be triggered for a number of reasons. Usually it's something that there's something wrong with how the local account is rolling up to the DPI chart of account. There could be other data formatting issues, such as if there are mismatches with, different funds, or it could be that if they're using a project or program tag, which is an additional identifier that can be added to account if it doesn't match up with a specific project code, all that would cause a data format validation. The other validations that we use in WISEdata Finance are all fiscal in nature, meaning that if certain criteria are met by an account that is being pushed, it may trigger an L2 validation. So a good example of that is there are a lot of WISFiP accounts that are pushed that cannot have a negative amount associated with them. So that would trigger validation. From an accounting standpoint, we utilize a lot of different funds, which are sort of self-contained siloed, funding silos, Fund 10 being the largest one for sort of general operations. And we have other validations within the system so that financial data that's being pushed to us, we ensure that it's meeting certain accounting requirements, that if you have a fund, it's in balance. That the revenues and expenditures, when you look at, say, the starting fund balance for the year, plus all the revenue, minus the expenditures, making sure that it matches what the ending fund balance is in the system, the data that's being pushed. Making sure that the balance sheet accounts that are used in accounting match up and that the fund is in balance and debits and credits match the expected versus actual change in equity. But otherwise, also other fiscal validations include, we have on record amounts, like when we're giving out aid as an agency, we know how much, say, an LEA is getting an aid. We check to make sure that the amount that is tied to that specific account in WISFiP for revenue matches what we have on file as this is how much you're receiving. And it's all just to make sure that the data is accurate. From year to year, everything is in balance from an accounting standpoint. And then we can ensure that the financial data that is being pushed is correct, so that when we use everybody's financial data for doing the aid runs, it's the data that we want to be using. So in WISEdata Finance, we display, this is just a summary panel on our landing page where we display the different types of validations that may be triggered at any time, sort of broken up by the fiscal years we have active in the system. This is just another screen from our landing page where just indicates not only the last time data was pushed, but when we run the validation, the import and validation job in WISEdata Finance, which is something that runs on a nightly basis, but can also be triggered manually. It'll indicate the last time accounts have been updated, last time local account, local budget, local actual by fiscal year. You can see the number of records, financial records that are being pushed and when they were last modified. That's to actually manually do that. In addition to, this is an area that we're sort of focusing on right now. We do have functionality within WISEdata Finance to also view L1 validations. So if they try to push accounts and they're not making it into the system, you can see some element of that within our application. Some of the vendors have gotten a little bit proactive. I think Skyward's a good example of that. So when not, Skyward has a way of when you're pushing accounts, if there is stuff that's going to be rejected, it actually sort of rejects it sort of as it hits the API. So it doesn't actually report consistently on our end. But there's reporting within Skyward where you can see, oh, these accounts did not push. We're going to come to an agreement on that. It's just the WISEdata Finance, the validation screen where we list all the validations being triggered. This is an example of that data formatting validation. One, it doesn't like the fact how it's trying to roll up Fund 98 to Fund 99. Yep, I talked about some of the other fiscal validations, negative amounts on record. Fund transfer validation is triggered for a number of reasons, especially for like if you're moving, say, funds from the general fund to Fund 27 for special education, there's a expenditure account in the one fund and a revenue account in the other. There's a validation just to ensure that that revenue account equals that expenditure account because they should always be the same. They should so much always be the same that I think the vendors should just make that a one entry thing. Previously, as we've continued to work with districts to pick data, we're continuing to tweak the validations that we have in the system, determining which ones is this still a validation that we need to have in place? We tweaked negative amounts validations in the system that when we initially rolled it out, we're looking at the individual local account could be negative. But then we determined like you do not really care if you have multiple local accounts with a negative amount, but when they roll up to that DPI chart of account, it nets positive. We updated the validation to allow for that. We updated the validations so to allow a de minimis amount of negative 99 cents to 99 cents. So basically under $1, which is due to an issue where that as LEAs do their financials and they also work with the auditors who come in and audit the financials. There are auditors out there who do not do things to the penny around the things to the dollar. I include a lot of whenever I present the WISEdata Finance validations, I include a lot of slides on the specific scenarios and how they can be addressed. But I'm going to just power through them. Although some of this is interesting. We have a sort of trial balance screen within WISEdata Finance, which is broken up by fund. You can look it under the budget or the actual data, but these are accounting tests to make sure that when we look at the balance sheet accounts and the revenue and expenditure accounts, that everything within that self-contained fund is in balance. And if not, it triggers a validation. So we look at things like, what is your beginning fund balance that you're reporting to us? What's your ending fund balance that you're reporting to us? That's the change in your equity. And we look at, well, here's how much revenue you had come in. Here's how much you expended. The change in equity should be the same. Continuing to work with LEAs and business offices on we can determine when we want to actually have some of those validations in the system turn on and actually be active or not active. We have validations for both budget data and actual data. Building a more comprehensive view of the L1 validation data within the system to help troubleshoot accounts when they're not making it into the system. And we're continuing to add additional validations as we identified the need to. For instance, we're working on transitioning that special education annual report. A lot of what we're going to need to do in order to make that report super slick is by validating some of the data that's coming in, including for Fund 27. We don't validate accounts not only against the chart of account to make sure they're valid accounts within WISFiP. In Fund 27, we also validate those accounts to make sure that they have an appropriate project code associated with them. Fund 27 is a fund where all expenditures have to have a project. So those are validations that do not currently exist, but we're going to build into WISEdata Finance to ensure that we can build the special education report in WISFiP. In addition to validations, there are addenda, which are basically validations. The difference is the physical validations are being triggered. In order to address those, it requires the LEA to fix the issue on their ledger and re-push their data. You want to get rid of the validations. And we actually prevent submission of a lot of our reporting until all those validations have been cleared up. Addenda is similar. It looks for a specific fiscal scenario, and if it sees it, it triggers an addenda. Instead of to resolve or address an addenda, you have a couple of options. You could update your ledger so that that fiscal scenario no longer exists and then the addenda just goes away. Or the addenda just allows for additional data collection to collect information we need to ensure certain things. So addenda trigger just like validations. We have a whole bunch of rules behind the scenes in WISEdata Finance that look for things, and when they see them, they trigger a validation or addenda. We had all of the addenda we have in the system were areas that we had included in the previous fiscal reporting. So in the annual report in SAFR, we had a whole list of addenda for both the budget report and the annual report that if certain criteria were met, we had to collect additional information. When we transitioned to WiSFiP, we did a huge audit of all those addenda and, took them down from about 80 addenda we had on the annual report to about 29. And in WISEdata Finance, the addenda are triggered. You can actually go into the addenda details screen, and addenda look like a few different things from a fiscal standpoint. So either we may just want the LEAs to verify something. Oh, you have an amount in this account that is over this amount. Now, just this account is meant for this. Is that what this is? So it could be us just collecting a yes on the screen. It could be that, oh, you have this amount in this account and last year you had this amount. Can you please explain, like, that's what this is? Can you please explain that what's going on here, basically? But we also do things like, okay, you have $6,000 in this account, or what do we have here? Other deposits payable is greater than 0, requires district to provide details of the needs of others. So we'll, a lot of times for specific accounts that are being reported, it's just one account with one amount on it, but we know it's used for several different things. We may just, the requirement is go in there, add itemized records for it, say, okay, well, it's $811, $201 of it was for this, $200 of it was for this. And then the system just makes sure that the amounts you're entering across all those itemizations adds up to the amount you have on the account. And then as part of our annual report review, we pull and look at all the addenda and make sure that what has been entered is accurate. So yeah, as soon as they have records that add up to the amount, the addenda is resolved. Again, we have the reporting set up so you can actually submit your annual report or whichever report if you have pending addenda. So they need to make sure that either you're updating your books so the addenda is no longer there, or you're going in and completing it before you're able to submit. I touched upon this briefly. When we first rolled out WISEdata Finance, we added an additional sort of identifier element in the system. This was really to accommodate if an LEA was using a project code for a program that has a DPI assigned project code. If the LEA was using it something different locally, the project program tag in WISEdata Finance. So Title 1 is 141. It's the project code. If a district is using 180 for Title 1, they could put on all of their 180 project code accounts, they can put a Title 1A tag on it. And then on the 141 accounts, which should be Title 1, we just put a local use tag on it. So we know that, oh, you're using 141 for something else. But all of your all your Title 1 expenditures are under 180. Happily, I'd really like to get rid of this, or more importantly, I'd like to keep this functionality but find other uses for it. And it turns out, as we do a lot of the school level reporting right now, the majority of LEAs are just using the DPI assigned project codes, which we assign project codes for specific programs between 0 and 600, well, 599 really. And then we leave 600 and above for specific local use for tracking costs in whatever manner the LEA would like. It's the best practice, and what we encourage everybody to do is that all LEAs are pushing data to our systems at least monthly. Most, if not all, of the vendors also have utilities in them to where you can actually just schedule data pushes within the vendor so that it's done automatically. Still, we want everyone to go in and actually look at the data in WISEdata Finance to see and to ensure that it matches what's being pushed from their end. So we always just encourage all the LEAs to, at the least, push once a month. And usually a good way to do it is after the monthly bank reconciliation. So it is a good time to push data. So right now, we just opened the SS school level reporting. This is the ESSA school level reporting is a requirement under ESSA, in which it's a little bit interesting for a lot of like the federal reporting we have to do, like especially for all the stimulus funds that we just got. We got specifications from the federal government about what they wanted for that data that are hundreds of pages long and a real delight to read, let me tell you. The ESSA school level reporting requirement actually comes from one line in ESSA, not in any financial area, but in the reporting requirement that says on your report cards or in other systems, you need to be displaying this, 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 and this. And one thing says school level expenditures. So the ESSA school level reporting is we collect the data and to determine and display district-wide versus district-wide versus school costs, and then broken up again between whether or not the expenditures at the district or school level, if they are state and local expenditures or if they are federal. And we do that to determine a sort of school level per pupil expenditure. I'll get back to that in a second. Yep, talked about how we're doing or redesigning the special education annual report. A lot of that work has already been, the groundwork has been laid by the work we did with the annual report. All the data we need for that report is already being pushed to us. So we have to just collect a few other points in that report. So state special education categorical aid calculations should start to go a lot more smoothly. We're working with our collections team to create a public financial dashboard. So sort of analogous to WISEData, WISEData, which as we transition to WiSFiP, WiSFiP is an application that falls within the WISE Home platform, which is where we host all of our secure DPI applications, which means that unfortunately, in order to access it, you have to be set up with an account and you have to be assigned by agency. So that differs from the reporting we had in our legacy portal SAFR, which we had views of that built, in Oracle, where there were reports that we had that were publicly facing. And as you can imagine, a lot of these statewide financial reports for some of this stuff, members of the public and other people really, really do want to see. So we're working with our collections team because we can't just give everybody access to WISFiP or make that accessible without a login, creating sort of that WISEdata type system, which is a public facing financial dashboard to display a lot of this financial data. This is to basically provide the same access to the school finance reporting that we had publicly available in previous systems. It is also, there is a act from the state legislature that was passed a couple of years ago called Act 89 that says that we need to display and be clearer about financial transparency and displaying specific data that's sort of requested by that committee and making it publicly accessible. There's a lot of call out in the field for really being able to look at one district and compare them to the other, or look at specific areas of interest, such as like open enrollment, things like that. And how the money moves and basically what's equalization aid look like that year. So we're working with our collections team, the SFS developers and the collections developers to build that platform. And like I said, continuing to move reports into the new system. And then also starting to build some administrative functionality internally to help with the work that we do for the actual reporting or the aid run process or determining revenue limits. So building internal tools. So school level reporting used to be a report, was always been in WISFiP, but it used to be LEAs would go in and either their vendor would generate an upload file, it could be uploaded into the report, or they manually go in, say, here are our schools, here are our district level, state, local, federal expenditures, and then do that, enter that data manually for all schools as well. And then we use the enrollment that we pull from WISEdata from third Friday in September to determine per pupil expenditures for that report. We now have rebuilt the report to utilize the financial data that's being pushed to WISEdata Finance. In order to actually complete this report, the financial data that we currently have that is already in the annual report and being pulled in, we have most of what we need to complete this report, but we had to do some additional data collection, so this report, the largest operable piece of this report is collecting the crosswalk or the association from the LEAs of here are all the location codes that you have on your local ledger. Tell us for each one of those location codes if it's either a district location code, so the accounts in there are expenditures that are district wide, or is assign or tell us what school is used by that location code. And then of course had to build it so we could do some more nuanced things. Some LEAs have location codes that that contain expenditures for more than one school. So we can sort of proportion it out and they can say, oh, that's 60% this middle school, 40% the high school. And we also had some other weird edge cases where a district had a location code where they had it split between district and one school for those expenditures. So we've been able to accommodate a lot of that. But now that we're collecting that association, and then we're also pulling in all of the project codes that are being used locally by each LEA. And then we make an assumption that okay, here's your list of project codes you're using. We're going to assume we see you're using 141. We're going to assume that that is Title I. That the report does allows the LEAs to manually update that within the report if they don't use 141 for Title I, or if they have another project code that they use for something else, and then so they can assign that program to what they're using, and then they can indicate whether that program is a federal program, because that's what we use to determine whether or not the expenditures are state and local versus federal. The super exciting part of it is with that additional data collection, that association with the location codes to the schools and the project codes to the specific programs, now gives us the data that we need to meet a lot of federal reporting requirements that we have to do on school expenditures, which is an area where the federal government is more and more pushing states to be reporting financial data, not down to the district level, but actually down to the school level. And we actually have reporting that we have to do, an actual school level finance survey that goes to the federal government, where we have to actually detail out costs down to the school level by district, which used to be which sort of required us to look at a lot of the data that we collected in our various reporting, and then either have to collect additional information from the LEAs or really try to impute something through a number of ways that were sort of allowed. That's all out the window now. Now I just have a giant table that has all the data I need to just basically spit out that report. Super exciting for Jim Reinerson, our auditor, who has to complete that from federal reporting. The special education annual report that we collect every year is basically used to determine how we basically distribute the state special education categorical aid. It's some certain appropriation from year to year that all goes out to the LEAs based upon a reimbursement rate that is determined by the amount of money available and what are the actual eligible expenditures for reimbursement out in the field, with a few other fun curveballs in there. So this is going to now just be built to where we're pulling in all of the financial data we need, which, like I said, we already have. We already have all your Fund 27 accounts. We have your local accounts, so we have the project codes that you're using, so we know which of the expenditures are state and local, and which of those are eligible for state categorical special education categorical aid and which are not. And based off that number, we determine how much you can be reimbursed out of that aid source. So it's going to be a lot easier than the previous reporting. We're going to do a lot of this sort of data and financial checks in order to complete that report by continuing to build validations within WISEdata Finance, and building additional addenda in WISEdata Finance that will pull into the report. There are a couple of, beyond just looking at the Fund 27 accounts by project code, there's a couple other specific areas that we just have to build some additional data collection. We've always traditionally tracked, there's a lot of grant payment in and out for services between districts and CSIS and CDIPs. So we've always tracked that historically, really to ensure that anything that was paid for with federal funds is also not being submitted as an eligible cost under state categorical aid, because that's double dipping. So we'll build that within the system. There are certain caps on how much you can be reimbursed for certain personnel positions in pupil services, such as, you know, school counselor, school social worker, nursing, school site. Under a thing called Act 221, which basically requires us to look at how much you have in salary and benefits, say for school nurses in both funds 10, the general fund, and 27. And it basically caps it as, oh, you can only submit for as aid eligible up to this percentage of that. There's a different prorated cap for each of those four areas. But we'll be able to basically build that as a validation as well, because we have the accounts that we need to do that determination. We can say, you know, oh, the cap for school psych is 22% under Act 221. We look at the total amount of salary and benefits under Fund 10 and Fund 27 for all those school psych. It's, you know, $400,000. 200,000 of that is in Fund 27, you know, 22%, or I really made this more difficult for myself than I need to as far as the arithmetic. But basically, instead of having to sort of manually enter, you know, what are your amounts in for this function for both Fund 10 and 27, and like applying a cap and doing it as a report, we can just automate it. And if you do have salary and benefits for that position coded to 011, which is the aid eligible project code, and it exceeds the amount that would be allowed due to Act 221, it'll just trigger a validation. And that just means that that amount would have to be reduced, and then the remainder, it would just get recoded as 019, which is the non-aidable project code. So when we got WISEdata Finance up and running, one of the first systems we connected to was WiseGrants, which we connected our, there's a requirement under IDEA for special education funding called maintenance of effort, which basically school districts and other LEAs are required on a yearly basis to not reduce the amount of money they're putting towards special education from a local standpoint, even if they are getting federal funds. You know, federal funds cannot supplant other funding; it has to be supplemented. So in order to continue to receive IDEA funding from year to year, LEAs have to meet maintenance of effort financial requirements to ensure that appropriate money is still being put into special education. So we wired WiseGrants immediately to just look at WISEdata Finance data and pull data in from there, instead of having it manually reported or pulling it from the 1505 SAFR. So that's the primary use. We did a lot of work when working with districts who were failing maintenance of effort or had significant data issues to clean up a lot of their Woodward chart of accounts. So that helped a lot as we transitioned to doing the other SFS reporting. We're going to continue to connect those systems to help sort of validate things, really make sure or help reconcile what is being claimed on these federal grants versus what is being recorded on the ledger. It's never going to be fully automated. Like the financial data will never be like, oh, does that mean we don't have to do grant budgets anymore? Fortunately, federal funding is always going to have additional requirements or strings attached to the use of those funds. So there's always going to be additional information that we're going to need to have to collect to ensure that those funds are being used for allowable costs. But a lot of other fun stuff we can do. Now, as those two systems were sort of developed separately and we're trying to bring them more into concert, there are a lot of areas where the woofer accounts that we use in the federal grants management system don't necessarily align with the level of detail or what we have on the DPI chart of accounts or that we require for other reporting. We're going to continue to try to align those so that we can provide tools that sort of help reconcile, you know, what you're claiming and reporting as revenue from these federal sources and the expenditures towards what you have on your ledger. Am I early? I don't know how long these sessions. Does anybody have any questions? Other than, I know, Lori, anybody here really handle finance stuff? Okay, excellent. See, thank you.
It goes into me.
What's that?
Yours, she goes into me.
It does not, especially as a lunchtime. Well, if anybody has any questions or if they want me to, you know, take the microphone and end the recording before they ask, I can do that too. But otherwise, thank you, everyone. Yeah, have a good day. Stop recording.
It's not prepared.